Space Valkyria 3, probablement l'une des bases les plus iconiques du serveur 2B2T. Tout le monde connaît Space Valkyria 3, mais peu de monde connaît l'histoire complète de la base. Et quand je dis l'histoire complète de la base, je veux parler de l'histoire entière de la base. De sa planification à sa construction en passant par les bugs de duplication qui ont fourni les matériaux nécessaires à la construction de la base, vous allez tout savoir sur Space Valkyria 3. Comme d'habitude, si la vidéo vous plaît, vous pouvez vous abonner et liker la vidéo, votre soutien m'aide énormément. L'histoire de la base commence fin 2016. La Rusher War est finie depuis longtemps et le nombre de joueurs a baissé. Jack de Ripa décide de refaire une base dans l'aine. Il décide que cette base sera Space Valkyria 3. Jack planifie la construction de sa base avec beaucoup d'attention. Il commence par dessiner les plans de sa base afin de savoir à quoi elle ressemblera.
So ever since the fall of the first Space Valkyria, I'd always been experimenting and dreaming of the next big idea of what I wanted. I'd never gotten to finish the first Space Valkyria, so I was very much in love with the idea of making another one, but doing it better. And so, of course, part of that planning process, part of the dreaming process of what I call it, is more just writing ideas down on paper. It's not necessarily mandatory that you stick to the plan. So what you draw on paper isn't necessarily set in stone, as it were. But it's a good sort of guideline to give you something to look forward to. Maybe you like what you draw, maybe you don't. Drawings never have to be this big bad end of the line, end all to be all sort of thing. They're very helpful to get your thoughts in order. It isn't necessary that it looks good. You don't have to put a whole lot of detail or thought into the entire process. You just have to kind of get your thoughts organized enough. And for me, drawing is the best way to do that.
Jack va se déplacer dans l'aide à l'aide de ses Elytras. Il va donc trouver un premier emplacement pour la base. Grâce à ses plans, Jack de Ripa va estimer la quantité de ressources nécessaires à la construction de Space Valkyria 3. Ils vont donc commencer à farmer à la main les ressources nécessaires pour la base. Jack va obtenir de l'aide inespérée pour farmer les ressources. À cette époque, le drop dupe va devenir public. Jack va donc pouvoir facilement farmer toutes les ressources dont il a besoin. Ils vont commencer à dupliquer les ressources nécessaires pour la construction de la base. Les membres de la base sont à cette époque Alpha Computer, Silver Crown King, Particus, Monoxide, Xarviar, Kinorana, Exalted Spartan et Jack de Ripa. Kinorana était à la base avec un compte secondaire nommé Talkerbud. Ce détail peut paraître insignifiant, mais vous allez voir qu'il a son importance. À cette époque, Kinorana partageait le compte Talkerbirds avec l'un de ses amis, Mason. Or, Mason se connecta avec le compte Talkerbirds. Il découvrit donc les coordonnées du premier emplacement de Space Valkyria 3. Jack décida donc de déplacer la base.
So the first site was basically just the first place we came to that I felt was far enough away. Yeah, I saw one of those new end gateways because I wanted to build a base around an end gateway. And I always, just figured nobody was going to go out that far and inadvertently find us. So we dedicate the first site to just sort of moving items.
Space Valkyria 3 va donc être déplacé de 1000 blocs. En même temps, le groupe de Jack de Ripa va se diviser. Exalted Spartan et Xarviar n'arriveront jamais à la base. Particus va également quitter le serveur. Silver Crown King va se lasser du serveur et Kinorana va quitter la base en raison de drama avec Alpha Computer et Jack de Ripa. Au deuxième emplacement, Jack va construire le centre de la base et l'anneau autour de la base. Cependant, Jack se rend compte que les deux parties de l'anneau sont décalées. Jack doit donc détruire tout l'anneau et le recommencer. Cet événement va le pousser à quitter le serveur pour quelques mois.
The second location and the entire place came to be, it was a passion project. In about 2 or 3 months' time, I did most of the work, and then I just kind of worked on everything else and sort of polished up some parts here and there for the rest of the year. And I duplicated a lot of items when various dupes came about. If not for these items, I definitely would not have been able to make the copy that I ended up making in 2018. However, about about November, October of 2017, before I took a small break because I had made a mistake that ended up being a very, very, very large mistake. And it was very tough to correct that mistake. But it wasn't so bad. Just time consuming.
Jack va néanmoins retourner sur le serveur pour de nouveau déplacer la base. Vous vous souvenez que Mason avait obtenu les coordonnées de la base. Mason va quitter 2B2T et va partager l'ensemble de ses screenshots avec un joueur nommé Lane. Lane était en conflit avec Alpha Computer. Alors quand Jack the Ripper et Alpha Computer ont appris que Lane avait les coordonnées du premier emplacement, ils décidèrent de déplacer la base vers un troisième emplacement, jugeant que le deuxième emplacement était trop près du premier. Le troisième emplacement était à 12 000 blocs du deuxième emplacement. De plus, en juin 2017, un cheat appelé Botfly leur permet de transporter des animaux dans l'aine. Là, Jack va recommencer à construire la base. Il utilise notamment Schematica, ce qui lui permet de progresser plus vite sur la construction de la base. Pendant la construction du troisième emplacement, Jack va inviter un autre de ses amis, Hermetic Lock.
I joined Space Falcon 3 right around the time it was probably halfway completed, and it wasn't my first time basing with Jack. Jack and I were Spawn Masons together. I'd invited him there shortly after I think Alpha Computer had come into the group. And he based with us at a couple of different end bases before then. And I think that was my experiences with Jack in the Spawn Masons was probably what got me the invite to participate at Space Valk.
Cependant, la base est griffe en été 2019. À l'époque, la communauté pense que la base a été griffe par les Nerds Inc., qui ont utilisé l'Underpearl exploit pour trouver les coordonnées de la base, comme le montre cette vidéo de Fast Vincent 1.
Nerds Inc. once again arrived after obtaining the coordinates to the base from the Enderpearl load exploit.
Les Nerds ont en fait utilisé le Nocom exploit afin de trouver la base. Le troisième emplacement va donc être griffe par les Nerds qui avaient déjà détruit les précédents Space Valkyria. Jack décide donc de retourner au deuxième emplacement de Space Valkyria 3. La base est toujours intacte et il va donc reprendre la construction du deuxième emplacement.
After we had been griefed at Space Valkyria 3, at the third site, we just quietly returned to the second site, hoping that nobody had ever found or touched it. And sure enough, that was exactly the case. Nobody knew there was a second copy. I'd spent all of 2018 using the supplies that I duplicated in July 2017. I spent all of 2018 making that copy from those duped supplies. And in the violence and fury of the nerds' grief, they completely missed one donkey. And that one donkey, we smuggled it from the third site back to the second site. And that one donkey, because of the God mode exploit using donkeys and writable entities, we were able to quickly amass all the new stuff that we needed to keep building on the second site. And for about a year later, that's exactly what we did.
En 2020, la base est trouvée par accident par un streamer turc nommé Doku Kandal. Ce streamer va immédiatement poster les images de la base sur Reddit en disant qu'il vend les coordonnées de Space Valkyria 3. Très vite, la base va être trouvée par d'autres joueurs. Cet événement marque donc la fin de Space Valkyria 3 sur 2B2T. Mais en décembre 2020, Jack the Ripper va commencer une série de streams dans lesquels il continue à construire Space Valkyria 3.
However, all good things come to an end. And yes, this was when the Turkish player, Turkish streamer and his friends, Dogu Kanadal, found the base by accident, and they tried to sell the coordinates on the 2B2T subreddit. It was a very unfortunate time, very, very nasty situation. After that, I just kind of built to myself for a few months for about 6 months, until December 2020, which is about the time I started deciding to stream everything that I was doing. And little bit by little bit, I've added on more and more to the overall base. And it's really blossomed as of late. It's coming up on 1 full year as of this recording. And I'd say I've gotten about 40% of the overall city that I intended to make Looking back on it, I really don't think it would have been possible to build this on 2B2T. Not with the materials that I had available to me. It would have taken so many years just to do the city. It would have been mind-boggling. I'm really glad I had World Edit to help speed things up, because World Edit and Creative Mode have condensed about 2 years of work into about 10 months. That's something. 2 whole years of work, which would otherwise be unavoidable. So yeah, that's my Space Valkyria journey.
Pour finir la vidéo, j'ai demandé à Hermetic Log ce qu'il pensait de Space Valkyria 3, et voici ce qu'il m'a répondu.
Jack is one of the most talented builders in the community, if not in Minecraft as a whole. The things that he's been able to do on 2B2T are amazing, and they render me speechless. I remember when I first found out that a Space Valk 3 was being made, I was already excited without having looked at it, just to see what is this going to look like. And I remember coming into it the first time and just going, holy mother of God. Alpha Computer was able to give me a brief tour, and we started at the middle of the base, and he kept on talking about a outer circle. And I looked out, and there is this, floating platform with a couple towers, but that's like the inner circle. And at the time, I had thought that that's what Alpha Computer had meant by outer circle. And then we kept on exploring, and he took me to a ring that was, I think, 1,000 blocks in diameter and 500 radius, and that was the most insane thing that I'd ever seen. When he was talking about an outer circle, my perception of the outer circle is what was actually the inner circle, and it was even more detailed than the inner circle, the outer circle was. So it was just one of the most amazing bases that I've ever been a project or that I've ever been a part of, and I'm just so thrilled that I got to base with Jack while he was doing that.
Merci d'avoir regardé cette vidéo. Je voudrais remercier Jack de Ripa et Hermetic Log pour m'avoir aidé à réaliser cette vidéo. Je remercie également Fast Vincent 1 qui m'a laissé utiliser des extraits de sa vidéo. Si ma vidéo vous a plu, vous pouvez vous abonner et on se retrouve dans une prochaine vidéo.